Let's start big picture for the American audience because we've been a little busy and we haven't been paying attention to our UK friends quite so much. We'll get into these individually, but there's a lot of issues for an outside observer that I'm watching here. And we covered the election, and we know Keir Starmer rose, and we know the Conservatives kind of collapsed, and we know reform is on the rise. When you see headlines like the youth vote, like the economic stuff, like the Palestine stuff, like the migrant stuff, big picture wise, before you get into all their individual merits, this really looks like a Labor government that is flailing, has never really found its footing, and is just bouncing from thing to thing to thing to try to figure out what sticks. Is that an unfair assessment of what's really going on big picture wise?
No, I'd agree with you completely. This has been the case for this Labour government since it came into office. And it's actually quite surprising because the polls suggested from as early as 2022 that Labour were going to come in with a landslide majority with a couple of hundred seats in Parliament. And so you would have thought that their policy teams, their advisory teams would have prepared for this, would have prepared to come into government and hit the ground running. And yet what we've seen is the complete opposite of that. Almost from day one, this government has been marked by crisis after crisis, mistake after mistake. And as a result of that, we're seeing, the rise of, as you said, reform in the polls. We're seeing people lose confidence in Labour, not just ordinary voters. Businesses are losing confidence in this government. Its own MPs are losing confidence in this government. We've seen that through a number of different votes and other types of scandals recently. And so, yeah, I think it is definitely the case that this government doesn't actually have a clear direction. It's just running from fire to fire, trying to put each one out rather than tackling the main root issues at play here.
And just so we can do a bit of a review for the American and international audience that maybe didn't keep up with it, Reader's Digest version. The review of this is the Conservatives were in power for 14 years. It got really messy at the end. They were just running through prime ministers. Normally, that means Labor comes in, and traditionally in the modern era, when the out-of-power party comes in, they usually get at least one full election and then the next election before things get really ugly. This has been different, not just because of the Conservative collapse, and you could go back to the Boris Johnson stuff when that really started and then what happened after that. Reform is on the rise, and Labor, you explain it to me. Are they caught in the middle between two things and don't know how to triangulate? Did they just assume that Conservative down, we would be out, and didn't put the work in? What happened there? Because this is a bit of an anomaly in modern UK politics that we're living in right now.
Yeah, and it's quite strange because, this is a two-party system that has existed for however many hundreds of years. And this is a once-in-a-generational shift. We saw it, in the 1920s when Labour became the dominant second party, and what we're quite possibly seeing now is Reform becoming the second dominant party. But I think, it goes to that point that the Conservatives were in power for 14 years. They had the opportunity to set things straight, to make things right. And because of their failure after 14 years, voters turned around and said, okay, well, we're going to give Labour a chance. And as I said earlier, had Labour hit the ground running, had they started properly and made good progress with good policies in key areas that mattered to people, then I think we'd be looking at a very different electoral landscape than we are currently. But because Labour have failed, so miserably, so quickly, voters are turning around and saying, well, why would we want either the Conservatives, who we've had in for 14 years, who just messed it up, or a Labour government that hasn't benefited anybody in their first year of government? Why would we want that? Why would we not just go for an outside party? And it challenges this preconceived notion that a lot of commentators have, which is that Reform are just this, right-wing party that are the Conservatives, but a bit further to the right. That couldn't be further from the truth. Reform are an all-encompassing party, and we saw that in local elections where they were taking seats and councils off of Labour strongholds. And this is just a complete shake-up of the political system, and it's going to be interesting to see the general election in 2029 as to how this all plays out.
And part of that interesting part is, and I want to be fair here because it's easy for us to just go on TV and dunk on people. And sometimes they deserve it, and Labor deserves it, and the Conservatives deserve it. And when we criticize reform, they usually deserve it as well. However, there's some systemic issues in the UK right now that, and it was very interesting when we covered the election, how many people we talked to of our friends that were very pessimistic that even bringing Labor in instead of Conservative, and they were just like, we don't really think this will change anything, but we just want to kind of settle things down. There really was some pessimism because of some of the systemic problems going on, the economic problems, the housing crisis, the immigration issues, NHS. You can pick your issue. There's a very pessimistic stream to UK politics beyond just the typical stereotypic British, we're grumpy about things. Is that unfair to say?
No, I think that's fairly fair to say. And again, it goes to the point that we had a Conservative-led government for 14 years, and they were faced with these issues, like you said, whether it be the NHS, whether it be housing, whether it be migration, and they were given numerous opportunities and numerous mandates to solve those issues, and yet they just didn't do it. And what we're seeing a lot of the time from different governments of different parties is that they just throw money at the problem, or they throw band-aid solutions or sticker plaster solutions at the problem, and they don't actually try to fix the long-term issues. And so, for example, what we're seeing with the NHS, nobody in the UK is in denial that the NHS needs some type of reform. Now, what that reform looks like, we don't know. But successive governments have just repeatedly thrown money at the issue, and they said, well, if we just increase yearly funding to the NHS this year, then our problems will be solved. And as every year has gone by, the problems have just gotten worse, and we're spending more and more money. And it's just this black hole of finances that we just keep pouring money into, and nothing seems to get better. And so I think that, again, is part of the appeal as to why people are turning away from this traditional two-party system, because none of it has worked for the last few years. And another party is coming along and saying, okay, well, we're going to change up the system completely. We're not going to do things conventionally. And that's appealing to a lot of people who feel as though, the political establishment has left them behind.
Yeah,